I have another camera.
That looks better. It's better. Now your lighting is like, you look great, baby. You're a star.
I wouldn't go that far. But anyway, okay, let's do this.
Hello, Gotham. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, McGinnis. This episode is an exclusive interview with Colonel John. John, good to see you. Hello, Gotham. Quick sidebar. This is a video that, an interview that I conducted with Colonel John in October of 2020, October 15th, 2020. We ended up talking for 2 hours, and I got overwhelmed editing it, and now I am re-editing it and posting it because I think it's a lot of good stuff. And stuff that Bo Burnham talked about in his special, so look at me talking about the same things that our boy Bo is talking about. But the beginning's a little chunky, and I'm just cutting right into it because we talk about some good stuff. So, taking a moment to gather thoughts. There's a cute girl off camera. A little bit about John. John is the program director at a summer camp in New Hampshire, one which both myself and Harry Tully attended in our youth. I went on to be a CIT and then a counselor for 3 years following. I really wanted to have John on the show because this man's life is devoted to creating a safe and educational environment for children to, function within, without the biases that are peppered upon our youth, especially in the 21st century, on the daily basis. When I was there, there were no phones. There were no... we could get away with iPods. This iPod Nano 2nd generation, which I need to get a charger for. But that's all I'll say. Enjoy the interview. A lot of what's happening today is just like a generational divide, but like looking at the average age of a member of Congress or anything. It's,
They're older than I am, and I'm no longer young. I'm Gen X, and so I've yet to have a president. I'm 55 years old, and there's never been a president from my. No, Obama's a baby boomer. He's older than I am, I think.
But you're like my mom. You're like at the cutoff.
But I'm solidly a Gen Xer because my wife. So I worked with kids, and I married a woman 4 years younger than me, and my dad died when I was a kid, so I wandered around and sort of had these experiences that weren't that common in the 80s. They're more common now than they were then. So my dad died when I was 17.
Wow.
And I lived in fear of making my mom cry.
Oh.
I now that I'm older and I have my own kids, I came up with the analogy that it's like mooring a boat. Moor a boat from two sides, it can't move. But if you moor a boat from only one side, it's got a much larger berth. And so I was still really tied to my mom, but I had a much larger berth, and I did things that I probably wouldn't have ever done had my dad not died. I got travel bug. I lived in my car for a year and taught science all over the West and Mexico.
Oh, wow.
I like all of these things sort of made me who I am. I ended up traveling all over the world, doing some normal things and doing some not normal things, as would be the case when you're traveling all over the world at 22 by yourself and you're solo. So cool. I'll let you fill in those blanks.
Yeah.
And that made me younger. And it really so I am a Gen Xer, but I really think and act like a Gen Xer. And I think it's because my late adolescent years were really spent being free. It didn't tie me to being a baby boomer. Like some people who are my exact age kind of trend up and they act more baby booming. And I'm like when I look at what they talk about Gen Xers and baby boom, I'm not a baby boomer at all. I'm way more of a Gen Xer. I have way more in common with the staff that are immediately below me than people who are just a little bit older than me. Because I didn't have my dad, I did all sorts of things that I wouldn't have. I probably would have gone to law school, for example. So I wouldn't be, I don't think I would be sitting here right now, which is the whole irony of it.
Yeah.
I'm really happy. It's a mind play when you start thinking like, oh, if I could do one thing, it would be talk to my dad.
Right.
But if my dad were actually here, I wouldn't have the life that I have now.
Yes.
Like that's a real mind play. But the other thing is that I think it's because when I was developing into an adult, I hung out with Gen Xers and not baby boomers. And so I think that's why I'm the generational thing. But the mind play definitely of, you know, I've often thought like the one thing I would love to do is have my dad meet my daughters.
Wow.
But I also realized that my daughters probably wouldn't have existed had he lived, because I wouldn't have made the choices that made me end up with Emma.
All these time travel things, man.
Yeah. Like you realize how serendipitous life really is.
Yeah. Serendipity. There's a word that has popped up a lot for me this year. Like even like in January, February, before everything fell apart. I got fired from my like corporate coffee job for negativity because I had been in contact with HR for a year and a half, telling them that the two managers that had been there in the time I was there were both emotionally abusive, and the first of which, who was gone now, was misogynist and gross, and that was too negative for the company, so they fired me. But it was the day before I was going to give my 2 weeks notice to quit there and work at this little mom and pop shop.
Why is that serendipity?
Because I had been trying so hard to make that company better. And then I was about to give my 2 weeks notice, and my only thing was like, God, I don't want to work for them for another 2 weeks, but I don't want to let them down by bouncing. And then they fired me. And I was like, great. And I walked around the corner to the shop that it's actually the first shop I ever worked at. They took me back. And yeah, now I'm working 2 days a week for them. And I'm still able to collect a little bit of unemployment. And it's just like that. I want to see that trend back of like going local, going and taking care of the people in your community and like treating people like family, because that's not what I see happening anywhere in this country.
Now, is that harder in a big city?
It's
or easier in a big city?
The thing is, we're so used to it here that there's this weird sense of, it's a survival tactic, I think, where we just disengage from it and like keep our head down and like make money and like go about our life here, because like that's the thing, is everyone knows who Oswald Cobblepot is, but he's mayor anyway. Like that's the sick joke. When Joker, Harley Quinn, Robin, and Batgirl all disappeared in 2002, like something changed, because all the other like rogues really had something they were after, and Joker really was just an agent of chaos. And that's why there's so much media about him now of like, who was this guy? And like you'll see so many different takes on it because he is an enigma like that. I think it was just a sick obsession with attention. And it speaks to the question of rehabilitation, the question of Arkham Asylum, the question of what do we do when someone reaches that point? And I'm seeing the same behavior on a presidential level that I've been seeing my whole life in Gotham. So yeah, I recognize what's happening, and I don't understand why so many people can't. Does that make sense?
Kind of, but not, because I live out here in the woods. So it doesn't, like, I don't see it daily the way you guys see it, I think. I mean, I only read about it. It doesn't really impact me. Like how, you know, if it's not in your face, sometimes it's easy to think it doesn't impact you. But I guess serendipity actually means that it does, because it just is sort of swirling around in the world and it's going to come in. land on you anyway.
And that's what I really have this like ominous feeling of right now, is that November 3rd, as Stephen Colbert has said in his show, something is coming to an end. And here's the thing is, like, I'm also worried about November 5th because so many people know the remember the 5th of November, gunpowder treason plot. Like, we don't need a calendar man or woman anymore for this stuff. Like, we all know these things. A copycat can pop up like that.
Hopefully it won't be close and we won't have to worry about it.
That's I can only hope for Joe to win in a landslide, because anything less than that, I think we're in a lot of trouble.
Oh, if it's close, I actually think we're in trouble too, but I'm hoping that it's clear.
And I have no idea if it is or not, because I don't know what to trust. 2016, on November 7th, how are you feeling? The day before the election. What was your life?
I was worried.
Because okay, so you were worried. You didn't think we had it in the bag.
No, because the polls were. So this has driven me crazy for 4 years. The polls were actually correct. They weren't wrong. She won by 1%. The polls said she was ahead by 1%, give or take 3 points. She won by 1%, give or take 3 points. They just didn't factor in the Electoral Congress.
And the fact that
the polls weren't wrong. They were right.
You're right. You're right. The popular vote, and like we're talking about all these things, like the Electoral College is antiquated and should be removed, and so should the Republican Party. Like that's the simple way to say it, but our country is run by so many just antiquated and like systemically racist.
Okay, I've always lived in small states.
Okay,
so I've never lived in Gotham. Mm-hmm. I've always lived away. There was 5 years that I spent in Philadelphia, but aside from that, I've always lived like in kind of rural areas. Great 5 years, by the way. But anyway, that's another topic. When you're in a rural area, you realize that like the people are in Gotham, but the only thing that even keeps you semi-relevant is something like the Electoral College. It's something, and so I get that. Look, I understand how it was bad in the beginning. I understand that it was a concession to slaveholders. I understand, but that still doesn't mean that it doesn't
serve a purpose.
It still serves a purpose.
Yeah.
And that purpose is that, California has 40 million people in it. Yeah. And so on one hand, you can objectively look at that and say they're underrepresented for the number of people there, and that is not democratic. And I agree with that. These two things don't negate each other. Mm-hmm. But if they didn't have the Electoral College, honestly, the people of Wyoming simply would not matter at all. And so, discuss.
I think what the two-party system has become is there's this in conflict with this, but there's no room for compromise anywhere in between. My vision is that Joe wins in a landslide, and then there's a special prosecution led by VP Harris of Trump and everyone who aided and abetted him, because I consider these war crimes what he has done. It's funny, Aziz Ansari has a bit about this.
So look, we're divided. It's okay. We've always been divided by some of these big political issues. It's fine. As long as we treat each other with respect and remember that ultimately we're all Americans, we'll be fine. But the problem is,
there's a new group. I'm talking about this tiny slice of people, not tiny, that have gotten way too fired up about the Trump thing for the wrong reasons. I'm talking about the people who, as soon as Trump won, they were like, we don't have to pretend like we're not racist anymore! We don't have to pretend anymore, we can be racist again, woo! If you're one of these people, please go back to pretending. You gotta go back to pretending. I'm so sorry we never thanked you for your service. We never realized how much effort you were putting into pretending, but you gotta go back to pretending.
I forget that you're a Southern boy. And so much of my life is seeing like peers here talking about how much they hate the South because their association with it, like you having never been to Gotham, for them they've never been, and it's just this place of like fear that they will never go.
I understand.
What is that for you navigating that identity? Is there kind of a sense of needing to protect the name of your home?
No. Wow, that's a really complicated issue.
Oh yeah.
Being Southern sometimes is embarrassing because everyone assumes that you're dumb. They assume that you grew up with no shoes. So you do grow up with you don't grow up with a chip on. No, you grow up with a chip on your shoulder. You also, people never know what they don't know. You just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so you don't realize the depths of, I can only speak for myself. I won't speak for other people at all. Like you don't realize the racism that you're carrying around. So, and I'll say this, like, so I was born in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That means that I remember the Civil Rights Movement. It means that I remember my brother and sister being pulled out of school before I was in school because they were integrating schools. It means that I remember. It means that I remember. Means that I remember people saying really vile things, really mean, hurtful things that I could tell you. Like I remember them, like they're in here, but I'm not going to say them.
Yeah.
They would be hurtful and embarrassing and not productive, but they're as bad as you think they are. I am relatively certain that probably most of them are probably still said by certain demographics of people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Here's how complicated this is. So I remember my dad saying those things. This is a man that I love.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my dad saying these things. They were very vile. I didn't know they were vile. So I didn't know what I didn't know. That's what I mean by that.
Right.
I also remember this same man when I was probably in second or third grade. I know I was young.
Mm-hmm.
Stopping the car, getting out, ripping something off of a telephone pole,
Whoa.
coming back to the car. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm ripping down these posters." I said, "What are they?" And he said, they're posters for a KKK rally. And I'm like, "Where's there a KKK rally?" And he's like, "Oh, it's up in this peach orchard, like underneath this tree, blah, blah." Like, I knew exactly where it was. I said, "Well, why are you ripping down the poster?" And he said, "Well, there's not room for people like this in our society anymore. We need to move on." So this is actually a problem that I have with this narrative right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we seem to want to look at everybody as good or bad, and they're one or the other, and it refuses to acknowledge how human we all are.
No one bad is ever truly bad, and no one good is ever truly good.
You, Mr. McGinnis, are neither good nor bad.
Yeah.
You are both, just like everybody else.
We all are, and that is a really like sweeping all, and it has to be, I think, to be able to actually address the issues.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't mean that you have to forgive everybody.
Oh, you have to forgive. You do have to forgive.
It's a big ask right now for a lot of people, and that's upper white suburbs bubble, like the teaching me since like second grade that Martin Luther King Jr. cured us of racism and we were all good now. We've been good since the 1960s, apparently, is what I was told. It's a complex question.
So here's the reason that Martin Luther King was loved, and it's because he taught love. He also taught more than love. Don't get me wrong; like he taught a lot, but at his core was this message of love. So, you probably heard the phrase. I think I may have said this to you before when you called me. I'm going to say it again.
Uh-oh.
Because I think you need to be reminded. And
Probably.
You need to be reminded until you can say it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So people can only love once they love themselves. Love is really the only thing that can get us through all of this, period. And there's all different types of love. Love requires forgiveness. You don't forgive someone for their sake. You forgive someone for your own sake. Because forgiveness is what allows you to go on with your life. In order for you to keep moving on, you have to be able to put something in the past. That doesn't mean you forget it. That doesn't mean that it was correct. That doesn't mean you agree with it. That doesn't even mean that you don't acknowledge that what happened was maybe even a flagrant error of consequence that hurt people. It may have hurt people. It may have killed some people. I don't know. You still have to forgive so that you can get on with the real business of loving, which is actually what life is all about in the first place. And if you don't forgive, you're only holding yourself back. Because it's not ultimately, once again, it's not an act that you're doing for the other person. Forgiving is ultimately a selfish act.
When the person that you're trying to forgive is still actively doing the things that hurt you to others, that's something I have difficulty reconciling with, because, and I think this has become a bigger, a more like immediate issue in this technological age. Like for myself, I was born in 1993, and but I remember dial-up and everything since. So like my world got so much bigger so quickly, and Gen Z's world has been that blown up for their entire like awareness of the world. And it brings me to that question more often, since we have this globalization, since we can see the footage. How do I forgive Breonna Taylor's killers? How do I forgive? There are plenty of names we can throw out here, and it's a great question. If I can't forgive them yet, why not? And do I have any? Because I'm getting ahead of myself there.
And I don't know if I can ever answer that. I'm not that. I don't think that I'm. I don't think I'm that developed. But I know, you know what, it's hard to forgive somebody while it's happening.
Yes.
it would be highly unusual to forgive someone while it's happening. I have as bad of a temper as anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to make this sound like oh, we never like I got a temper. Of course I can. Of course I make mistakes. Of course I've done things to hurt people that I certainly never meant to. But I do think that as I listen to all of the anxiety that's in the world,
Mm-hmm.
all of the sadness that's in the world, all of the depression that's out there among our people,
Mm-hmm.
the only answer to that at some level is to enter into this like circle of love. And I know that forgiveness is an integral component. And therefore, if you're going for your own self-help and for the health of the world, ultimately you got to figure out how to enter into that cycle. Now, do plenty of psychologically healthy people not forgive? I'm sure they do at some level. You know, I guess this is a tool or something for me to use. Maybe but I also know that it's been taught by a lot of very smart people that are a lot, you know what, they've got a lot higher pay grade than I have. And so,
But you've been the director of a summer camp for how many years now?
this one, 22, but I was another 10 before I came here.
Yeah, like you
So
are
32 years.
you have a life of shaping young mind. Like my favorite like sign is caution future world and local leaders at work and play as you're driving onto the campgrounds. Since my like that's the my first summer at camp, that made me think like this is going to be a good place. Because if that's who I'm going to be at camp with, this is going to be awesome. And you know, we've talked about like how that did and didn't happen, but it did happen in many, many ways for me.
Yeah, I mean, the realities of people is that we all let each other down.
Yes. Yeah.
We all do. You know, I'm no different. So now we're back to that whole forgiveness thing. Like, how do you, if you're going to move past that? See, it's so funny. Think about even the words I just used there. If you're going to move past that, you have to forgive them. It's no clearer than that. Like, if you want to move past it, you have to forgive them, which is really interesting. I remember I wrote a letter to a young person whose parent had died. And the parent had died. Actually, their parent had not died at this time. They did eventually die. And the person was considering not visiting their parent before they died.
Ooh, wow.
And I wrote them a letter saying along the lines of, you don't need to visit your parent because of your parent. You need to come and visit your parent because of you. Because when you're 50 years old and an old person sitting somewhere like I am, you're not going to want that hanging over your head. So, you know, in fact, I guess I was asking that particular person to forgive that parent while they were in the midst of something, because I knew that they would need that for their own sake later on. That doesn't mean it was easy, and that doesn't even mean that he forgave. Forgive is such a big word, and I think it connotes something that we don't necessarily, you know, I think we think it means forget or put it aside, or, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to forgive what's going on in the country. So, you know, back to Breonna Taylor, you have to get it to a point where you can do something constructive with it. and that will require some modicum of forgiveness. And ultimately, I think the only way that we're going to do something good with it is with love. That's just my own personal take. Now, I think history would tell you that there's always been a group of people who have pushed change, and that has always helped promote change. I'm not, I am not dumb for that.
That can't happen on a national level, though, I don't think.
Right.
On a national, every American to rally behind a violent call to action is hard. It's why we haven't had another revolution yet.
Well, we had a civil war.
But I don't think that was really a revolution, because you didn't see the Confederacy actually dismantled and condemned, because we've still seen the flags flying all over the country, not just in the South. And
there were some in New Hampshire. Nothing infuriates me more.
yeah.
My entire family fought for the South, and it's
And that's something.
such a waste of life.
Yeah.
All the way around. My mother's side of the family had about 8 or 10 of its males who all went away in regiments of 2,000 or more, who all were returned home dead, with fewer than 200 people living in their regiment, none of which owned slaves. So, I mean, the historical narrative is complicated, to say the least. It's such a waste of life. Hundreds of thousands of lives were just, well, you know what? 100,000 lives were just thrown to the wind like they were nothing.
History.
Yeah. That's a faint echo.
Right. That's something I'm really embarrassed about as an American, is that, like, there's no learning from our own and the world's history. Like, there's and well, I mean, I can see it as it, like, I feel like my generation, well, I feel like what we were talking about of you not having anyone as your president, and I certainly haven't. It's been this boomer club for so long. And I mean, I don't know when they got into office, but it looks like boomers have been making laws and policies for boomers, and we all get tugged along for the ride. And it's just like, I wonder, I haven't thought about this in a while. I think I might have told you this last time, but my easy fix to democracy is, if you're in the House of Representatives, you're age 25 to 35. Senate, age 35 to 45. President, you're older than 45. And Supreme Court, you're, like, retired and a historian.
Wow.
And then just see what happens. Generational requirements will balance a lot of things, because each generation should be building upon the last. Luke Skywalker says that in The Last Jedi, or no, Yoda says that to Luke Skywalker. He's like, that is the true burden of all masters, is that we are what they grow beyond. So why isn't there this built into the government, a sense of having people of all ages going into a room to make decisions together? And at the end of the day, you're representing everybody.
So it is time for the Jedi Order to end.
Time it is for you to look past a pile of old books. Wisdom they held, but that library contained nothing that the girl Rey does not already possess. Pass on what you have learned. Strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher failure is. Luke, we are what they grow beyond. true burden of all masters.